Welcome to the Humanergy Leadership Podcast. My name is David Wheatley. We're here to talk leadership in small, bite-sized and practical chunks. Enjoy.
Welcome to this episode of the Humanergy Leadership Podcast. And this week, I'm going to be talking to the author, Chris De Santis, about his book, Why I Find You Irritating, Navigating Generational Friction at Work. And Chris is an independent organizational behavior practitioner, speaker, podcaster, and author with over 35 years of experience working primarily with clients in professional service firms, both domestically and internationally. And over the past 15 years has been invited to speak on generational issues in the workplace at hundreds of leading US law and accounting firms, as well as many of the major insurance and pharma companies. He has an undergraduate degree in business from the University of Notre Dame, a master's degree in business from the University of Denver, and a master's degree in organizational development from Loyola University. And he's going to be coming to us today from a quiet corner of his Lincoln Park neighborhood in Chicago. Here's Chris. Well, welcome, Chris. I appreciate you coming along and joining us on this podcast today.
Well, thank you very much, David. I really appreciate you having me. I hope this goes well.
So do I. If it doesn't, it's all editable. As I was just saying, as we briefly chat beforehand, I get sent a lot of books and information about people, and not very many of them pass my my stage gates, but yours was interesting, and that's what I wanted to talk to you about today. But before we start, just give us, beyond your bio, the 30-second information that makes it, why should we listen to you about generational differences?
Well, I've been aware of this topic for about 18 years. And to your point, I've read about 60 or 70 of these books just to get a sense of what the topic is. And what I've tried to create is a space that hasn't been covered, because I think there was a lot of assumption when these people write books about categories. I'm trying to debunk and separate the perceptual differences from actual differences, and then debunk some of the exaggerations of difference that I think we encounter.
Well, which is what attracted me, because that's the stuff that's always pushed me away from talking generational differences. So the book is Why I Find You Irritating.
Mm-hmm.
I've just thrown it on the floor, otherwise I'd show it. So the
I can show it.
Yeah, thank you. There you go. Mine's now spread across the floor. And there's a few concepts that I was hoping you could enlighten us on today. That, and I said, one of the reasons that's steered me away from generational differences in the past has been stereotyping.
Yes.
So
yes.
Talk to us a little about your take on stereotyping and salience bias.
Yes, that's under one of the chapters I talk about generalizing, because I think humans generalize. And one of the big pushbacks on this very topic is, oh, you're generalizing across a whole group. Well, of course I am. And I am not suggesting I'm right either. So I have to go back to the definition of generalizing. And I use the work of Noam Chomsky. He's a linguist, but he talks about what is the process by which humans do this. And so I use his deconstructing. First, there's this notion of you delete. And when I say by delete, that means things that are common to us, you and I have in common, we don't notice as readily. We just think that's the assumption. That's just who we are to each other. It's when we notice the difference. And for instance, in our world, I notice that you have an accent different than my own. Now, with that, I will remember that, as it were. And then I go back to my memory. Now I will remember that. And this leads us to distortion. So I will remember that I met somebody from Britain who has an accent. And then I start to think, oh, since my mind's not a camcorder, I distort the memory and says, well, what do I have my experiences with Brits? And so then I start to group those experiences if I know all Brits by virtue of my sample set, as it were. And then that sinks into the layer of generalization, because eventually we don't want this cognitive load of having to remember each person we encounter, but rather we want to remember through the group. And that's what leads us to generalization, which of course has utility. It has utility because you got to get through the day. If I had to meet everybody as a novel event, it would be a very long day. So what I do is I use this as a heuristic in terms of, oh, a Brit. Oh, what do I know about the Brits? Okay. And then I sort of make these statements, which aren't always right, by the way. And the salience effect is I don't need to be right all the time. I just need to see that I'm right some of the time. Salience is if it's salient and I notice it and then you do it, I say, aha, of course you do it because that's what I think of you.
Right.
So we're so lazy, we don't look for counter information. We just look for confirmational information. And then we just go about our day thinking we are absolutely right about everyone. I debunk some of that when I talk about generational differences, because the young get a lot of grief.
So that grief, I mean, a lot of it is, hey, they don't seem to want to do as they're told. You need to be coddled and brought along,
Right.
and everybody got a trophy for participating.
Right. In fact, those are all titles of books, by the way.
The books that you've read, yeah. Having run a soccer program, we used to give trophies for participating, because in the place that we were, that might be the only trophy those kids got.
Well, you've made an really interesting point. You gave the trophy to the children, but the children are blamed for accepting it.
Which gets into the bias again.
Yes, it does get into the bias, because then we think, oh, wow, they get a trophy for everything. No, they are given a trophy for everything, which was part of the self-esteem movement. And the self-esteem movement was a mistake. It's a mistake. I think all God's children are good. We need evidence of greatness. And that was the failing of the program. You see what I'm saying? So it's an empty promise, as it were. But I do think recognition works.
Yeah, which you kind of lead me to the second question I had today, which is, why do boomers have so many challenges with millennials when they raised them?
Yeah. It's because of the incongruence of the experience. Boomers, myself, I'm a boomer. I was raised under what I call in the book a tell-do model. Tell-do means I'm told, I do it. I'm told, I do it. I went to school under a tell-do model, and then I went to work under a tell-do model. That's all congruent. That's all congruent, meaning, okay, my life didn't change at all. What we have done to the young, though, is we've raised them, millennials in particular, and actually the next generation as well, in a similar model, but slightly different. We've raised them under an engage, discuss model, a dialogue model. So what happens in the home, we have moved from a tell you what to do to discuss what you are doing. It's like, when I was a young person, and any of your listeners out here is a boomer, I would be very surprised if any of you were asked, where would you like to go on a vacation? I would be very surprised. I think it was just a privilege to go on a vacation, and then you're supposed to shut up and sit in the back seat for 3 hours, whatever it is. So what parents have done is they have said, no, let's engage our children more. Now, that model of engagement becomes the child's habit as an adult. So now they are used to a dialogue. Now, imagine the poor kid, they move from the home to the workplace eventually, and now they expect a dialogue when the boomer expects a tell-do exchange. And this isn't open for conversation, which quite frankly is highly incongruent for the young person. So because what the boomer does is they don't view the young person as necessarily their own offspring. They view them as a younger versions of themselves in the workplace, and this is how they survive the workplace.
Right. So do you think it would be different if it was their own offspring? And we do a lot of work with family businesses. I'm interested to see, is there a difference when you go to work versus at home?
Well, I do think there is a difference in how you engage in the home and how you engage in work. And therefore you become the role. This is self-complexity theory. You are not you all through the day. You are the role you play through the day. And so at work, again, to a multifamily environment where it's a multi-generational, they are in the role of leading an organization. And in the home, they are in the role of being a parent. So the confusion becomes when they cross roles with their child.
Yeah, and if that happens, if I'm in the role as a boomer, for example, in a leadership role, and I'm giving my kid the tell-do at work, and then I go back home and it's all they explain, that amplifies that confusion.
It not only amplifies it, it's surprising to the young person because they don't know what they have done wrong. What have I done wrong here in one circumstances and right in another? You see, that's one of the things we see these poor people or these young people as being obstinate or insubordinate or inappropriately challenging, when in fact they're just engaging in dialogue.
Yeah.
But we're not used to that, so we take it differently than what they might mean it. Don't get me wrong. I am sure there are obstinate young people. I'm sure there are insubordinate young people, but that is not the normative, and that should not be the normative interpretation of who they are.
And if you go into this, you mentioned the boomers and the millennials, and,
Mm-hmm.
and I just slide into the X's just, and I'll hang on to that. But only just. Yeah, I won't let you define me by my Xness because I'm nearly a boomer. But those definitions you define, and you define them by temporal culture in some ways.
Yes, yes.
Tell me a bit more about that.
Yes, we are a compilation of the experiences that we had when we were younger. And so the experiences are typically unique to the age of when you were growing up. So there are things like what was the socioeconomics of the time you were growing up in sort of the society. And so that is probably unique to whatever window of time we were, unless there's a socioeconomic consistency, which there isn't. There's a sort of an up and down of that. The other things are what were events that occurred. I would call these the flashbulb memories, or the catalytic events, sort of the cultural catalytic events that shaped your view. Like, I was a young person. We landed on the moon as a child. I'm thinking, wow, we can get to the moon. Okay, that's hopeful. So in that sense, you see these things, that shapes you, whatever those are. Some of these poor young people are living through today. They're seeing this excessive violence in the schools, and the threat and red drills and police in their schools. That's going to shape them at some point. So, and the point of that is what you're exposed to. And then lastly, what is your cohort group doing? What are the kids that you hung around with experiencing? And what messages are they sharing in prioritizations? For instance, today, they're sharing climate change existential threat. You see, that is going to shape them in a way that's different than how it shaped me. So temporal simply means at that time, what is the culture that we are creating, and that carries forward in the group that we are part of.
Which is when we get to stereotyping, that's the generalizations that we can take as a whole rather
Yes.
than those individual pieces. And
Yeah.
there's a piece of data that talks about in your book talks about how people vote depending on whether they registered just before or just after 9/11.
Yes, yeah, it's so interesting because we are highly influenced by the events around us, even though we don't think we are influenced by events. You see, humans we think we're much more clever than we are sometimes, but it's actually just a lot of what we go through are through the motions, meaning that it's integrated into how we think. We are not prone to be reflective, and we are certainly not prone to be reflective in a workday. So that's why we become accusatory or generalize or stereotype. It's faster.
Right. So then if I take this engage and discuss idea of the millennials and cross match it with, we wrote a book called What Great Teams Do Great a few years ago that's based on our work with teams over 22 years. And one of the things we found is that the setup of a team is significantly more important these days. Let's have the conversation about who we are, what we bring to the table. Let's get alignment about our reality. Let's make sure we all understand what we're trying to achieve and why, and what our mutual behavioral expectations are of each other. It feels like that overlaps with that engage, discuss.
You are so spot on with this. In fact, I just finished a book. I think it was Think Again, Adam Grant's book, and he talks about these two aspects of teams that are success or task and relationships. And teams that just focus on task without absence of relationships are less likely to be high performing. Right. Your point is, and my point in the book is the same. We should be having expectation meetings with our young colleagues in terms of why do I like what I do? What do you hope to achieve in what you do? What do you need from me in terms of help? These are the rules for how we will operate, meaning this is what I expect of you, how I expect you to communicate. This is what quality looks like. So all of those things are surfaced. You see, I'm of the model that, or I'm of the belief that most work is implicit in terms of the rules. And you only learn the rules after you break the rules.
So then if we're only learning those rules after we've broken them, and we have more conversation about the relationship rather than the task in order to get to the task.
Yes.
That's driven by the needs of the majority of the generation that's coming through the workplace at the moment.
Well, it's driven by a human desire. It's the pronouncement of the need that is unique to the generation. You see, boomers have always wanted to know why, but we were shot down after we asked it. If I said, why are we doing that? The answer would, because I said so. So this conversation it's an end. So we boomers and Gen X learned to live with the ambiguity of this, even though we don't care for it any more than the young. The young don't live with the ambiguity of this. They state, what do we need to do here? It's why Simon Sinek's book was so successful. Start with why. I've summarized the book, really.
Yeah, I'm normally wearing my ghost frame glasses. Will advertise myself as a poor man's Simon Sinek.
Yeah,
but I haven't got the right glasses on today. But we'll leave him out the picture. Then if I'm a boomer or an X, and as you can imagine, many of the people that we work with in a leadership role these days are in that category, and I'm finding exactly the title of your book, that a bunch of people who work for me are irritating me.
Yes.
What's the path that I should be looking at taking?
Well, I think one of the things you should have to look at is who am I at the table and what works for me. And what we do is we project what works for me onto them. And this should also work for you. And I think it goes back to your point earlier is say, what do you need from me to be successful? And now what we're doing is we're moving into a negotiation between us, because I think our best negotiators are our children, because they've been negotiating since they were 4 years old. So enter into the negotiation, and that leads us to an agreement of expectations between us, as opposed to just saying, this is who they are. Because let me make a point about the Gen Xers. Gen Xers in particular are most annoyed, because they've just figured people should figure this out themselves. You see, if they come from the latchkey kid, they sort of figured it out. Nobody said to them, okay, I'm going to teach you how to make dinner. They just had to figure out how to make dinner. Do your homework, do all the things you're supposed to do on your own. And what they think of the young, to some degree, is they call them needy. Those young are so needy. They are not needy. They are interdependent where you are independent. So what you end up doing is you expect them to be as you are, as independent as you are. And so you ding them for not, again, being you. And I'm saying, to your point, again, in your book, I'm sure you said this as well, diversity is the key to a team. So we don't want a team of all independents. We want a team of people that reflect different values and different ways of perspectives. That's a better team.
Which then links it back to emotional intelligence as well.
Yes,
yes,
it does.
If I'm aware of where I'm at and I'm aware of others, and I can better integrate those two things, then I'm in a better shape to lead that team.
And conversely, it's the external self-awareness that the young need to see, that they are seen not as themselves, but rather the perception others have of them. Right. And so whenever they act in a way that is congruent with that perception, they'll get dinged for it. So they have to say, how do I adapt to this situation to get past these generalizations about me that aren't correct?
So, and those, it's interesting, those generalizations, they tend to overlap. You've alluded to this already. There's a couple of places that I've seen. One of them was in the law enforcement community, where a 20-something-year-old kid, as I might call them, graduated from college, gone into the law enforcement world, and mum would call up to find out how son was doing. As the extension of the helicopter parent, and son's now got a gun and a badge.
Right. No, that's right. No, it's interesting, because this is again, that's the worst manifestation of this parenting model, is the helicopter parent, or the other version of that, the snowplow parent, the parent that removes all obstacles. What's interesting about that is the press loves this kind of information, because it makes for an interesting article. And then when you have a few of these articles, I call the young, and I mentioned this, I call the young, or the millennials, the Florida man of generations, because every headline with Florida man in it is a tragedy. That's the expectation. Now you just take Florida man out and you put millennial. Now we have a series of tragedies that we shape together in terms of put them all together and say, aha, look at these young people. They are this.
Which then comes back to that bias again.
Exactly. The bias is reinforcing by what and we live in the bubble of who we are. We don't explore difference. We stay within the balkanized view of what we think is right. And then we look for evidence that supports that in what we read.
So you kind of close up as part of your book talking about the value of mentorship.
Yes. Although I had to rewrite that chapter because I was a little too harsh. Apparently, they told me I was a little too harsh.
Oh, you've got an editor.
Yeah, exactly. I had more than one editor who said, Chris, you might want to take that back a notch. But the point I was making in this is mentoring, in its original sense, through the boomer lens, was an organic event that just happened as a consequence of somebody noticing you. It was never meant preemptively. You would never say, I'm going to find my mentor. It was in reflection that you said, I had a mentor, you see? So in that sense, what we've done now is we flipped it. We've said, we're going to give you a mentor. And the problem I have with the language is loaded. It implies an intimacy that is not earned. This, of course, creates anxiety for both parties, because all of a sudden this young person is coming forward and they might be, okay, I got to share my life with you. Okay, I'll tell you who I am. And then this more senior person goes, oh my God, why are you sharing all this information with me about you? You see what I'm saying? So there's this idea of going too far too soon and orchestrating it in terms of a policy is against what we do in terms of building an organic relationship. My advice in the book is step back a little bit, don't use that term. Use a term like advisor, shepherd, guide, anything that says, I need your advice and I want to give my advice. And we should narrow it to what both parties are comfortable doing and then let it flow if it becomes a mentoring event.
Right.
That's where I just think it's challenging. Now, we say, well, we didn't have mentoring events. We didn't have mentoring programs just because there were. Now the young are saying, you know this from the Gallup poll, I need somebody who's interested in developing me. I need somebody who cares about me. I need people at work who know who I am. This is in response to that. I just think the language they're using is loaded.
Right. Which then creates a loaded conversation and more potential tension.
Oh my God. And then they don't even define, because they don't even define it between themselves, because the young will infer mentor/sponsor, you see, and that's another layer of difference that doesn't exist either, because you have to really earn that, because that's the political capital that the mentor has to expend to support you. And that isn't given freely.
Right. And so it's not that the relationships are wrong. It's that the way we're labeling them and the way we're going about them is creating more tension than it is value.
Yes. And again, if it would just stay to advisor, it's easier to flip around. But if you say, you're my mentor and I don't like you as a young person, how do you get out of that?
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? Like, how do you, because there's no way that they were going to say, oh no, maybe they just ghost the person, but at some point it's asymmetric in the power. And I don't want to offend a power source, but if it's just advising, then you say, I'll just get another advisor because this is the thing I want to be advice on. And you're good in this area, whereas they're good in that.
Right. The term we use, I teach on Michigan State's executive MBA program, and I'm going to kick off another 120 candidates this coming weekend. And the term we use is your personal board of directors.
Yeah, I love that. See, I love that. That's brilliant, because that says, for you, I need this help. From you, I need this help. So it gives people a narrower range of sort of what I can do, and it makes both parties a lot more comfortable.
Yeah, and it then goes on, doesn't matter how old you are, you should always have a personal board of directors that you can tap into.
I agree. The other thing about mentoring is the assignment is always young to old. And I'm not sure that that's the way to go here, because there's so many other ways to mentor.
Well, and one of the things that comes out of your book is that the old, to use your term there, could probably value from listening to the young a little bit as to what they're bringing to the table and why they're asking.
Well, I've used the term reverse mentoring, because the young, what they bring to the table, especially the Gen Z, is that they are digitally fluent, whereas I think millennials are digitally aware. I don't think they're as fluent as their next. And the young are very good with social media. So they should be teaching social media to people my age and how to leverage that more effectively, because we're not very good with that. We're just not. We're not. I'm not on TikTok, although I think there's an opportunity there. I just don't want to make a 30-second silly video.
Yeah.
I'm not a dancer.
You're putting some judgment to it in the way.
I know I am. See, I'm stereotyping. I apologize to everybody out there who's a fan of TikTok. I don't mean to do that, but that's just what I've done.
but I think that kind of sums up what we do, isn't it? Because we do look at things with, I look at my parents who are 86 and 92, and my son lives just down the road from them, who's 29. And they're often saying, he has 3 phones. Can't the guy put this? Well, it's because he's on a council and a work and things like this. And they still have flip phones that have no smartness to them.
No, well, at least they have a flip phone.
Took some doing. The problem is they turn it off most of the time. Turn it on when they need it. Which, but that again is that clash of, why would I need this?
Exactly.
They would say that they had more freedom when the phone was attached to the wall than the kids do today when the phone's in their pocket.
Well, another thing you're talking about here is the habit of who we are also gets in the way. So the longer you do something, it's not a generational, it's a habitual issue as well. And by the way, all of us are willing to learn things if it has relevance to what we do and it fits in our lives. But to learn something that doesn't have relevance, it seems to be a waste of time.
So we have to make TikTok relevant to you. And
exactly.
Then you learn
it. It's exactly right. Because I'm not going to learn to dance anybody. I'm not doing that too soon.
Well, you should go back. I had a great interview with her name. She wrote a book called Lead and Follow, which is lessons about leadership from the tango.
Oh, now that's interesting. That would be,
So,
I'm not sure how far that would go with me, but I like the idea of it.
but the concept was great, and you should absolutely go back into the archive of the Humanergy Leadership podcast to look up that one, because the fact her name's lost in my brain there somewhere. It was a really good conversation. The concept was really good. So don't give up that thought that you might be dancing at some point.
Well, it sounds to me like an improv event where you follow the follower, in the sense that you are in sync with each other, and so you're sort of, that makes sense to me. But
Yeah,
I'm not sure if I could go the whole book on that. But I think I would like to
yeah,
find out more.
I just want to see the 30-second version of you dancing as a result of it.
Yeah, exactly.
So
although I do think, I will say this, I'm sorry to interrupt David, but I do think the future of learning has a high visual component, and I think it's going to be modular. You know, this TikTok, some version of this, and maybe some larger capacity, which would have to be, is going to be a methodology of teaching, as you well know, because you're more involved in teaching than I am.
Well, it's my son does everything. My eldest son does everything because of YouTube.
Oh my God, yeah. I couldn't take anything apart without YouTube.
No, it's phenomenal, isn't it? And
Yeah.
I often wonder about the kind of people who spend all their days filming stuff. So that
yeah.
who are these people? So,
Exactly.
but I appreciate them.
No, I do too.
The book is Why I Find You Irritating by Chris De Santis. And tell us some more about where people can find you.
Yes, you can find me on LinkedIn. That's easy. That's in my age group. And the book itself is available through Amazon or Barnes and Noble or Books A Million or the publisher Amplify Books. My website is CP De Santis, so that'll give you a better sense of all the things that I know something about, besides generational differences, which is one of the pieces of what I do. And the last thing, if you ever have a question of me, and I appreciate Dave allowing me to say this, but I have a podcast called Cubicle Confidential, and I do it with my colleague Mary Abijay, who wrote a book you might like, Managing Up. And so we take 3 questions a week from listeners on any particular topic around work. And so we do some variation of this, but it's just a very simple, we give about 30 minutes of advice.
Yeah, I love that idea.
Take. Yeah,
I love that concept. And you keep it confidential, so you give the answers, but nobody needs to know who asked the question.
Nobody knows. Nobody. We haven't made that mistake yet.
But that's good. Well, Chris, thanks for joining us this afternoon, and I encourage people to go out and take a look at Why I Find You Irritating. It's not only an amusing cover, but it's worth reading. So thank you for your time. Thank you, David. I really appreciate this, and thank you all. So that was Chris De Santis, and we were talking about Why I Find You Irritating, available at all good bookstores, I think. And he talks a little bit about the how, what, and why of generational dynamics and changes at work that are impacting that Why I Find You Irritating. And I'd highly encourage you to take a look at his book. And I picked it up off the floor now. So Why I Find You Irritating, well worth a look. And I hope you enjoyed that conversation. That was the Humanergy Leadership Podcast. My name's David Wheatley. For further information about Humanergy, go to humanergy.com or check out our latest book, What Great Teams Do Great, from all good bookstores. Have a good one. Stay healthy.